I have 10,000 miles on my 2023 Aprilia Tuareg after owning it for 5 months, and I think it's time to do a review. Let's get to it. Hey, how's it going? I just turned 10,000 miles on this bike yesterday, and I thought I've got enough experience on it that I can really talk about it, where I've ridden, things I've done, both on-road and off-road experience, and ownership experience as well. So before I get into that, I want to provide the highlights of this bike, but I am not going to go through all the specs. If you're interested in this bike, you likely have already looked at the specs, and if you own this bike, you already know what you have, but maybe you don't realize how good a bike it is. So let's move on, and I will get to the highlights and go from there. First highlight of this bike, which is one of the things that really drove me to want to purchase it, is Tubeless Wheels tires. I can't put a price on this. I don't see why anyone would not ride a bike that is tubeless. I don't like tubes. I hate dealing with them. It's easier to patch, plug a tubeless tire, and changing these is so much easier. So to me, this is almost like the #1 highlight is being tubeless. Next highlight of this bike is the electronics package, more specifically cruise control. I've tried riding a bike without cruise control. I do a lot of long distance travel, 450, 500 mile days, and without electronic cruise control, those days are miserable. On this bike, it is really easy, and it is another one of the reasons that drove me to purchase it. I also really like the electronics package on this bike with all the rider modes. One mode that I can set up myself, and then configurable off-road mode. So if I want full throttle, whenever I crack it open, I can do that. If I want a more mild throttle, I can do that. I can adjust engine braking, traction control, and ABS. It's really a fantastic package, and it competes with all the other bikes out there, and for the price point, pretty awesome. Another significant highlight of this bike is the stock suspension, both the forks and the rear shock. It is by far the best suspension that I have ever ridden straight off of a showroom floor. All other bikes that I have ridden, you have to do something with the forks, without question, stiffer springs, and you have to do something with that rear shock. And so far, this has worked perfectly for me. The other thing that I have not seen on any other stock bikes is preload on the forks. Having preload is amazing. So it's a huge highlight is just how good the suspension is right off. It doesn't need any modifications. You can ride it the way it is. I weigh 210 pounds right now without any gear, without my camping gear. Add all another 10 pounds, 15 pounds of riding gear, another 60 pounds of camping gear. Handles it perfectly. Tons of control. I've ridden some very rugged stuff and never had a concern. I don't know if I've even bottomed this out, and I've hit some stuff pretty hard. So huge highlight, suspension. Next highlight for this bike is ergonomics. This bike from the factory has the best ergonomics of any bike I have ever ridden. For my height, I'm 5'10". My arms are a little bit longer than the average person that's 5'10". I have a 33-inch inseam. Bars are in perfect position. I don't need risers. I don't need to bring them back. I can touch the ground really easily with seat height. The bend in my knees is perfectly comfortable for a motorcycle for long days. I have not thought one time that I need risers or that I need to do anything with the bars, that I need a lower seat, higher seat, nothing. So for me, at my height, my dimensions, this bike is perfect. Never a point in time where I've wanted to change anything. All right, now I want to talk about how this bike performs, handles on the road. I have done a lot of long distance traveling from the area I live in, central New Mexico. I've ridden to California twice and hitting tons of states. You know, in order to rack up 10,000 miles on a bike in a little less than 5 months, you must like to ride it, and you're going to have to do a lot of road riding in order to do that. Now, I'm not a canyon carver. I'm not someone who drags pegs, but I will say that this bike handles really, really well in the corners. For a 21-18 combination, it flicks around pretty good. And I've got to think that the rake and trail that Aprilia came up with on the front forks it does not feel slow. I've ridden other bikes that are 21-inch front wheels and they turned incredibly slow. This doesn't feel that way. I also like the 80 horsepower that this has. I put it in Explore mode. Sometimes I put it in the individual mode where I've got full throttle capability right away, and I can burn around anybody I need to. If I need to pass, not a problem. It's really easy to ride on the road. Now, in urban areas, if I'm riding around town, I'll put this in the urban setting because the throttle is a little bit slower. It's a little bit easier to handle stop and go traffic. And because I can touch really easily, both feet, 1 foot either side, it makes getting through traffic a lot easier. And then if I'm lane sharing, like riding through California, it's very nimble. I can move in and out of the lane, the cars, and it's just very intuitive to ride. I don't know how else to explain how intuitive this bike is to ride. It's very, very easy to ride. Some of that has to do with the electronics. Some of it just has to do with the ergonomics, the geometry for this bike. Braking wise, I front brake, single finger. That's all I need, middle finger. I don't do 2 fingers. 2 fingers is too powerful because this bike has extremely strong brakes. I know there's a lot of people that complain about the weight of middleweight adventure bikes, but I have to say I actually like the weight. The starting weight on this is 450 pounds, and I just rode from middle of New Mexico through the plains of Colorado and Nebraska to get up to the Black Hills to do some riding up here on the BDRX, and it was windy, extremely windy. And what's nice about having a heavier bike is it doesn't get blown around. Lighter bikes, if you're doing long distance travel, you get battered. I really think that this weight is the perfect sweet spot. And I wouldn't have said that before until I had spent a lot of miles riding through heavy, heavy winds. I don't get blown around on here like I did on lighter bikes, and I don't have that heavier weight of a full-size adventure bike. It's easy to move this bike around. Parking lots, turning it around, whatever I want to do. The weight is not an issue, and I actually think it's a benefit, especially in windy conditions. All right, what this thing is like riding off-road is it's exceptional. Out of all the bikes that I've had, this is the easiest bike that I've ever ridden off-road. Whether it just be regular gravel roads, deep gravel roads, rocky Jeep trails, or extremely rocky Jeep trails, this bike is really easy to ride. It carries its weight down lower, which means that you're not going to be feeling it tip over back and forth. It's a little bit easier to catch if you get off balance, but it has a really good balance to it. And like I talked about before, the suspension being a highlight for this bike, it really makes my riding better. I'm an average rider at best, but I am doing things on this bike that I'm pretty confident I would not have been able to do on any other bike. Just with the way the suspension handles things, the power delivery, the traction that it gives, the balance of the bike, the way I fit on the bike, it just makes it really, really amazing. I think this bike carries the weight pretty well. I've got everything in here really, really tight. But I've had other bikes that it'll blow through the suspension if you put any additional weight on it. This bike it just works. I really don't know what else to say about it. Yeah, it's an amazing bike. I really wished I had bought this bike a couple years ago instead of the bikes that I did buy. I think I would have been a lot happier. I've been really, really pleased with this bike. However, there are some sides to it that make it a little bit more challenging for people. The cost of ownership for this bike is going to be higher than other bikes. If you take this bike in for an oil change, it's going to be about the same as anyone else. It's about $300. But from what I'm hearing, the valve clearance check can be pretty expensive, anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000, depending on the shop you take it to. So I'm going to be finding out here really soon just what that'll be. And I'll do a video on that cost and understand what that is. But this bike has been amazing. This spring, I was to the point where I was almost ready to quit riding regularly because of the bike I was riding I hated, and getting this changed everything. I ride all of the time. All right, I did have one hiccup with the bike. It was missing a part in the assembly, probably a 50-cent spring washer that didn't keep the countershaft pulled into the seal enough which resulted in the bike leaking oil. I've got tons of videos on that. I'll leave links to those if you're interested. But since that time, I have had no problems with it whatsoever. I know that when these bikes first came out, they were having some oil leaks in different spots. My bike doesn't have any oil leaks since I had that issue fixed, but around the different seals, no problems whatsoever. It just runs, it just works. A couple additional notes on this bike is gas mileage. I average between 50 and 55 miles per gallon regularly. With non-ethanol premium unleaded, I can get all the way up to like 58 miles per gallon, I think is the highest I've ever seen. And that's doing about 60 miles per hour, just cruising, not really being hard on the throttle. So that's possible. But I've also, in heavy headwinds, or if I get bad gas, it's been as low as 43 to 45 miles per gallon. So there is some variability. Now, why this matters is this has a 4.8 gallon gas tank, and pretty easy to get over 200 miles on a single tank of gas. I think the longest I've gone is about 180, 85 miles on a single tank before I filled up. But on other bikes I've ridden, if I am starting to hit that 120 mile range, I'm immediately pulling over. I've blown past gas stations at 140, 150 miles, knowing that I can go another 40, 50 miles comfortably. So I think that does matter, especially if you're out in the West and there's long distances between fuel stations. Having that extra range on this bike, it just makes it more comfortable. I have never once thought that I need to carry more fuel on this bike. So I really, really like that. All right, so that's really my experience on this bike, both on-road and off-road. I have to say on-road, it's a ton of fun. It's really flickable, like I had mentioned before. Off-road, this bike makes me a better rider. I ride things on this bike that a lot of times I didn't even think was possible. Riding parts of section 2 of the BDRX, there was a really, really rocky section that I honestly, I don't really know how I got up it. I just pointed, used the throttle, maneuvered around, and it took care of everything. It was not based on skill. So this bike just makes me such a better rider. I really, really like it. And if you're looking for a middleweight bike, I'm really not sure why you would go with any of those others other than the ownership costs. Now, the one thing about this is the ownership cost of this bike is going to be higher, and primarily because it requires the manufacturer's requirement for getting the valve clearances checked is every 12,000 miles. And I know other bikes like a Tenere 700, it's 24,000 miles. I think the KTM bikes are around 19,000 miles. So that maintenance schedule is going to be a little bit earlier on this compared to others. And I'm hearing it could be anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000 for that service. So the ownership cost, if you ride a lot, is going to be higher. But really, as far as oil changes, it's going to be the same as every other bike. Tires is going to be the same as bikes that are in the 21 to 18-inch wheel size. Now, obviously, I have ridden a lot of miles in a very short period of time, so my ownership costs of this bike are going to be higher. But because of the enjoyment I get out of it and how it has inspired me to get out and ride more and more and more, really long distances, it's worth it to me because it's paying for experience, not a thing. The thing has made the experiences better. I can't put words to it on how much I like this bike compared to all the other bikes I've ridden. I just know that for me, this bike has met all of my expectations and has exceeded it, even with the little hiccup I had with that part missing. Getting through that since then, I have no regrets. So anyway, if you stuck to the end, I really appreciate it. If you own this bike, let me know how many miles you have on it in the comments below. If you have had any issues with it, leave that in the comments below. Let me know what your experience with this bike has been in the comments below for others to take a look and read. When I had those issues, I got so many comments from you that own this bike that said you love your bike and that you had the same amount of mileage I have on this now with no problems. And then also, if you've had the valve clearances done, let me know what those costs have been in the comments below so I can compare that to where I'm going to be taking my bike in to get it done. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this bike. I don't know why you would purchase any other mid-size bike if that's what you're looking for. This is really the one. if you have some extra resources to pay for those ownership costs. So anyway, remember, you can always make more money, but you cannot make more time. So don't pass up that ride when it becomes available. And then thanks for watching. Get out, do some riding, ride safe, and I will see you out there. Gobble, 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 gobble. Turkeys are so silly.